So
This conference will now be recorded.
Sorry, I forgot to start recording.
That's okay. Thank you, Carrie. So I do want to see if we can take a little bit of time, maybe toward the end of the meeting, just to check in with everybody and see how things are going in their districts. But we do have a fairly big agenda tonight, although we've tried to pare it down as much as we could. So I do want to jump right in if we can. I'm looking over to my left here because I've got it up on another screen. But the first item,
I'm sorry, Neil, before we get started, would it be all right with you if I read off the name of everyone for attendance?
Sure.
Okay. I'll read quickly. If you don't hear your name, then let me know. Nancy Russell, Clarence Haynes, Heather Gagne, Mark Schauber, is that how you say your name? Sandra Susan, Kevin Hansen, Tara Sweet, David Chandler, Sue Siglowski, Jim Salzgiver, Amy McMullen, Judy Murray, Kim Gleason, Lori Calders, Neil Odell, Adrian, Michelle Braun, and Colleen McKinnon. Is there anyone on that I did not list? Okay. That's all I need.
Carrie, 2 people just joined. We went from 20 to 22 in the last 10 seconds.
Carrie, Don Collins.
Yes. Yes, I had you, Don. Thank you.
Amy McMillan is back.
Okay, Amy. Okay, I have Amy now. All right. Okay, I'll mute myself.
No worries. And I just got an email that, from Dan that looks like he was having some connectivity problems. And so it doesn't look like he's going to be able to join us tonight. Okay. So moving then right into the agenda, the first item that we have up is an update on COVID-19 related legislation. I had a chance to talk with Sue a little bit earlier today. There are a couple of items that we knew need some board guidance on tonight, so I wanted to move those to the top and we'll focus on those first. One is an item related to, I guess for a lack of a better term, default budgets or budgets for those districts that either did vote and had their budgets voted down or have yet to vote. And then the second one for guidance on from the board relates to another possible delay for the Act 173 legislation. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Sue so that she can give us a little bit more information.
Sure. So for the first topic, it was discussed yesterday in Senate Ed. The districts that either had their budget defeated on town meeting day and the ones that have not voted yet. There are 9 who had their budgets defeated on town meeting day, and there are 9 that had scheduled their budget votes for later in the spring. And of course, now that we have this pandemic, they've had to delay those votes further. And right now, the guidance from the Secretary of State's office is that no elections should be taking place in the months of April and May. And there was legislation signed last week by the governor that does give the Secretary of State some flexibility to develop procedures to allow elections to occur in a safe manner in a way that protects public health, and it would allow ballots to be mailed. It had the procedures that need to be developed by the Secretary of State could also involve delivery places where ballots could be dropped off. It could involve allowing extra time for the for the counting of the votes to occur, so that not too many people would be in one room together. There's a lot of different considerations that the Secretary of State's office is taking under consideration right now in order to come up with those procedures. Those procedures are not in place yet. But there is a concern for these districts that don't have an approved budget yet. And when Senate Ed discussed it yesterday, they were looking at draft 1.1, which I had Carrie send to you just within the last probably half an hour. And then draft 2.2 is, they're both just one-page bills. That's one that that was just developed today based on the Senate Ed Committee's discussion yesterday. I'll go over what's in each of those in a minute, but wanted to let you know that the Senate Ed Committee is going to be talking about this again tomorrow, and that today there was a Zoom meeting organized by Vermont Superintendents Association with all of the superintendents of all of those affected districts, and they spoke about what they would like to see happen. So I can fill you in on that. I was actually part of the Zoom meeting, so I took some notes. And the hope is that that Jeff Francis and I will be able to develop a memo tomorrow morning to go to the Senate Ed Committee to have an influence on the way that they approach this issue. I can say that the way that they were looking at it yesterday was more leaning toward only allowing a default budget for districts that did not have an approved budget that was level funded based on last year's budget, and the superintendents were not, that were on the phone call today, the Zoom meeting, were not in favor of that, and I assume probably most board members in those districts would also not be in favor of that, because it would be extremely difficult. So if you like, I can go over the two versions of the bill. The first one is the one that they were looking at yesterday. That's draft 1.1. And what that says is that if the fiscal year 2021 budget of a school district has not been approved by the voters by June 30th, then the Agency of Education shall authorize an amount of ed spending for that district, which is equal to the ed spending amount authorized by that district's, in that district's 2020 fiscal year's budget, multiplied by a percentage that represents the average statewide increase in education spending of approved budgets for this year. So it's taking the district's budget from the previous year and applying a multiplier to it based on the average statewide increase in education spending. And so that's the one that they were talking about yesterday. The one that was written today based on their discussion yesterday says that if a school district does not have an approved budget on or before June 30th, 2020, then the Agency of Education will authorize an amount of ed spending for that district, which is equal to the ed spending of the district's 2020 school budget. So it's basically a default of level funding. And so that's the newer one. And as I said, that is the one that the superintendents were concerned about. I think they favored the language of the earlier version. I can say that not all districts are in the same position. There are some districts that were proposing a very small increase and had their budget fail due to also at the same time proposing a bond, and the bond failed, and so did their budget, and they were only proposing a 1 or 2% increase at most. So the bill from yesterday would actually give them a higher increase than they had been looking for. But there are other districts, South Burlington, and I think maybe Alberg was another one, that they're experiencing a pretty significant increase in equalized pupils. And so they are, that's why their budgets are going up, and they're going up more than the state average. And so even for them, even getting the state average would not put them in a very good position. So I would say, to summarize what the sentiment was, I would summarize it by saying they would like to see a default budget with some type of inflator that would be, similar to or the same as what was in this first version of the bill. But they also expressed a desire to have more time to get a budget past June 30th. That was definitely something they were concerned about. And also to have something in there that would allow for an adjustment for a district that has a significant increase in equalized pupils. For those districts that I just talked about that are having their budget go up due to a large increase in equalized pupils. So with that, I guess I'll ask if you have any questions or open it up for discussion, Neil.
Yeah, first, does anybody have any questions for Sue related to the proposed legislation?
I was just curious, Jim Salzgiver, Bennington, curious if on this basis, then it's if they didn't have a vote by June 30th, the Agency of Education approves. And is there still an opening for the community to then vote after that date, and and could lead to a totally different outcome, and that would kind of kick out the Agency of Ed of decision? Or how does that work if a community yeah.
Under current law, you need to keep voting until you have a budget, and that can go past June 30th. There is a provision in current law that allows for a district to borrow up to 87% of its last year's budget in order to fund its operations while it's trying to get a budget passed. But there is a concern about incurring interest fees when going into a borrowing situation like that. So, but that is the current situation with the current law without any changes. Did that answer your question?
Does anybody else have any questions related to the legislation? Sure, Mark, go ahead.
All right, just have to unmute myself. I was watching that Senate Ed committee hearing, and they seemed pretty adamant that they did not want an increase in it. In fact, they're talking about possibly looking at all budgets and doing some sort of global, essentially reduction out of the fears that they have because of the ed fund's position. So I don't know that they would even consider putting that language back in.
They may not, but we're certainly going to try. And there are other committees that it's going to need to go through other than just that committee. So yeah, we're working on a long-term goal here.
Yeah, so I understand the point to make, Mark, and I think that as the situation unfolds, we're all about to find ourselves in some pretty difficult circumstances, especially if you take a look at the outlook for the Ed Fund right now. But part of the concern, I think, is for those districts that just by the misfortune of timing weren't able to put their budgets before voters in the same economic conditions as the rest of the folks are facing right now. We wanted to sort of see if there was some way to give them, I think, maybe a level playing ground. It may end up in the end that all of us need to then chip in some way. We'll sort of have to see how things play out. But I believe that part of the discussion related to that was, well, if we're all going to have to chip in the end to try to address the shortfall in the Ed Fund, maybe we should all be relatively starting from the same position. So
which I would agree with that.
Yeah, so if there were some districts that weren't able to get budgets passed at all yet, then maybe there ought to be some concern about, putting them on the same footing as the other districts that did pass budgets, so that we're all starting from the same starting line, essentially. Are there board members on the call tonight that are in this situation, Kim?
Yes, Essex Westford is, and our budget increase is actually 1.3%. We were to have voted April 14th. That's just always been in my tenure, when we vote. And so we've yet to put a budget before our community. We had warned it, and we've postponed, obviously. But our budget is year over year up 1.3%, and our per pupil spending is up 3.36%. So, I listened in on that Senate testimony yesterday as well, and did not hear much of an appetite for an inflator in their exchanges. And I heard the same concerns for potential global fix, they called it. But I do appreciate and hope, and I know our superintendent was on the call today with Sue and Jeff, that the notion of having, at whatever point this goes before our voters, some sense of balance, because the misfortune of timing sets a really different stage for that vote. So, I guess we're one of those that would not need or want the full 4%. So I feel like a one-size-fits-all set of language is going to be problematic. I hope that they were talking about whether or not it'd be required over the current law. Senate Ed was, whether they would make signing a budget, if you don't have one by July 1, would be a requirement, or if you could do the 87% borrowing, or wait till you could put it before the voters later, and this was an interim solution. From our neck of the woods, I would say that the one size fits all we would not love to see. I think level funding for most budgets is not something that is going to be workable at this point, where most of us will be past RIF dates by the time we vote. And anyway, there aren't going to be fewer needs next year. So I appreciate whatever comes out of this that allows for some acknowledgement of a change in the dynamic, but maybe like holds the yield constant or does something. I don't know how they're going to fix this.
Okay. Anybody else in this situation?
Neil, this is Heather Gagne. The Caledonia Cooperative, when we merged together, our vote is always on May 5th. And so we've obviously postponed that, and we are going to fall into this. Unfortunately, the district lost a pretty substantial amount of students, and so our budget increase is 8%. And so last night when we met over Zoom to delay the budget vote, there was conversations about what we could do to look at our own budget to see if we could get the cost down because of the economic impact that this is having on our communities. At this moment in time, we actually don't think our budget will pass, even when it does go to the voters.
Right. And Sue, what I'm wondering is, and I guess that I get the sense that I had from reading through the legislation is that it's sort of it's a stopgap measure, right? So districts could still go ahead with their voting, and they could get a passed budget, especially for those, and maybe in Kim's situation, if they don't think they need like the full multiplier, they could still put a budget before voters and get that voted on. For the folks that feel like they've got a bigger increase that they deem necessary for operations, they can still pursue it. It's just that the legislation would then come in at some future date and say, essentially, you don't need to keep voting this in order to get something to pass. There is an end date to it. Am I understanding correctly?
Well, that's what we were talking about. The two actual bills versions that I sent to you have a date of June 30th.
And I guess is what I'm hearing is from folks is that maybe that's a little bit too soon.
Yes. I think that's what the superintendents were feeling as well.
Yeah. Colleen?
Just a quick question. I should have read the legislation and I did not, so I'm speaking from ignorance. Is it a budget increase that's being proposed or per pupil, an equalized per pupil spending increase? And if it's not equalized per pupil, perhaps that could be proposed?
It is not currently written that way. It's written as education spending, not education spending for equalized pupils. So it's with a multiplier based on average statewide increase in school district education spending. And I don't know the reason why. One of the superintendents asked about that as well today. I don't know why it's written that way versus another way.
Okay, thank you.
That does seem like, Colleen and Sue, that would take care of a South Burlington situation with, and it sounds like maybe Alburg, where they had defeated budgets, but they had increasing student populations. And whether or not that takes care of the percentage on the per pupil spending, I'm not sure, but it seems to make more sense that the multiplier would apply to per pupil spending than straight up budget.
So I feel like we're kind of deferring here to those of you that find yourself in this situation as to what you guys think the appropriate approach is for this, and the position that you think that the VSBA ought to get behind. Sure. Go ahead.
I think in our district, VMU has already voted and passed, but our other school districts haven't. And I know for the newly formed OOUSD, they have a 10.74% increase. So as a consequence of the forced merger. So extending out the date, and I agree, perhaps that equalized pupil approach may help them, but I don't know that their votes will pass even with the extensions.
Neil,
go ahead,
Clarence. I have some concern. My concern about this is if this is as unpalatable as it is, if it's a one-year solution to get them done due to the virus being around, that's one thing. But otherwise, I think this is a real slippery slope when it gives the agency the ability to set everybody's local budget. If they aren't passed, we'll just tell you what your spending's going to be. Instead of us, we now submit a number that is compiled to come up with the state ed fund desire, and if they get to take that away, they're going to go. It's going to change the whole education, the whole state funding aid system. If they get to set the amount that next year they say, well, we haven't got any money, so we'll just set everybody's budget at what it was last year with no concern for equalized pupils or some when they have a gain in students, that might be easier to cover sometimes than the loss of students where you don't have the base to spread the cost over as much, and so that could be more harmful. Loss of students in your budget going to go up a greater percent. So I just think if this is a stopgap for 1 year and it's very limited, it's as unpalatable, I could live with it. But if anything beyond that, I just think it's headed in the wrong direction. The points raised about having some multiplier in there or something to compensate for is excellent. That's got to happen in order for this to go anywhere, in my opinion. But it's I don't like the whole business just to start with. Hopefully we could get the budgets before the voters and passed.
Yep. Thank you, Clarence.
It is written in a way that is makes it limited to this year.
Yep.
Okay.
So what I'm hearing is just a general maybe favorability of looking at ed spending per pupil, or at least the equalized net ed spending per pupil, rather than the expenditure budget. Is there anybody that's opposed to that that method of looking at things? No.
So
You know,
can I ask, when that came up with the superintendents, how did that conversation go?
It didn't last very long, and I think it was because it would have taken more analysis of what kind of impacts that would have, and that it was, I think they just decided it was simpler to go with what was already written in the bill, rather than trying to change another factor in the bill and make it that much more of a complicated discussion. So you could certainly have a motion that allows flexibility for that if that turns out to come up later in the discussion. Wouldn't want to necessarily rule it out, but I don't know if you want to do something that's extremely limited and then it loses its utility possibly.
Right.
So can I just follow up to ask, was the complication, it probably not in determining, like, I'm sure the 18 budgets, 9 of which were never voted and 9 that did not pass, probably know what their per pupil spending versus budget over budget increases. Was it because the state knows, in terms of calculating the yield, the percent increase by budget versus by per pupil spending, and that is a factor they already figure out for purposes of the yield? Is that why, Sue?
That might have played into it, but I think I should clarify that it's not the total budget that they're looking at. They're not looking at total budget increases. They're looking at education spending increase. And ed spending is not the same as your total budget, because ed spending, if you remember, it subtracts out your revenues.
Yep.
Before you get, so you can get to ed spending. So ed spending is a particularly defined number. It's not your total budget.
Got it. So I would say we probably don't want to limit the language or limit Sue's flexibility. I think I would want optimal flexibility and as late a vote date deadline, probably. So not shoehorning an absolute answer. For some districts, maybe that is easier than trying to get a budget through, whatever is arrived at. For others, it and then that provides like a backstop to the situation. But for others, given more time, they might prefer the opportunity to be engaging with their community after coming through such challenge, and serving students and families through that process. They may want the opportunity to bring it directly to their voters and do so at a time that's safe for people.
Yeah.
I just, since it's a limited number, it's 18 districts that actually have an issue here, then to some extent, I think, this group trying to come to a conclusion of, what is the right position to take is, a lot of us don't have this issue. The 18 that do, it's a big issue. And I think to some extent, it would make sense to somehow try to figure out a way to, canvas that the people who are most impacted, because, it's so hard with these things to figure out exactly how it's going to impact an individual district. Sometimes, you get a lot of surprise things. We've heard here increases in equalized pupils, decreases in equalized pupils, a variety of other issues going on, the mergers I'm just expecting that, of those 18, there are probably, a handful of very different stories and very different issues and concerns. And for us as an organization to represent all those folks, I'm a little nervous to take a position that could end up, working very much against, half a dozen, districts.
Right. I think, Jim, though, in that respect, I think that I am hearing some consensus, though, here that at least the one version of the bill that just said level fund from current year's amount, folks, I think, are understanding the need for some leeway there to allow for an increase.
And I think there were themes too from the discussion of the superintendents this afternoon. I think all of them but one were on that Zoom call. And I think the themes were that they would like more time to be able to try to pass a budget, and that there should be some kind of inflator on the default number.
Yeah, so I'm getting a sense from our discussion tonight that this board is in favor of both of those notions, really. Give folks as much time as we think is possible, and also to consider, a multiplier over a previous year budget if it gets to that. Certainly with the opportunity to let those folks try to get a budget passed, on their own.
And
I would think,
go ahead.
Neil, I would think that if the state gets to set the budget, whether what they ever have the inflator or not, someone that has a large budget increase that they really need that's justified are never going to be able to get it passed. What voter is going to approve a budget after the state's already set a lower figure? To go ahead, it would be next to impossible to vote anything and get it passed once they know what the state's going to do if they don't. So I think that's another downside to this whole business. Your point of consensus about the two things I agree with that we're coming around. It's got to have an inflator. It's got to have something in it to account for the changes that are going on.
Yeah,
more
and I
time
think
would help.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Clarence, I was hoping that maybe our support behind having this last sort of phase of the process kick in as late as possible gives those districts the ability to pass a budget, and then without having the AOE step in and muck with that process.
Because I think that could be a problem.
Yeah.
If somebody knows it's going to be set in place, why are they going to vote something more? Even if the board makes a real good case for it, they've got the state behind them to back it up to the other position.
So I was just going to say, as the law stands now, all that exists beyond July 1 is the authority to borrow up to 87% of the previous year's budget. And the commentary was to cost districts more by having to borrow, at least the conversation with Senate Ed, and I think would be a common sentiment, is that to have that be the only choice for districts in an environment where it is beyond their control to be able to hold a vote is an unreasonable option. So the other thing I would say is, while minimally allowing us to delay that vote would be hugely important, and the alternative of doing absolutely nothing. So I would say, I think it is hard to put a number out there, Clarence, for the reasons you've mentioned, and also for the tolerance in the legislature and in the state and in our taxing communities of inflators at a time like now. So timing would be my number one priority, I think, and something that's better than a default of only being able to borrow 87%. But I think if we rock I don't know, I'm cautiously suggesting or worrying that if we push too hard on an inflator, we're going to get a global solution for all budgets because our state can't afford it right now, or we're going to, just cause more political conflict that gets nothing done. And if nothing gets done, to only be able to borrow up to 87% which is the current law, is a big problem.
So are there any other board members that have any other input on this matter?
The one thing I would add, just to clarify, is that 87% borrowing ability assumes that there's going to be voting occurring until a budget is passed. A budget has to pass at some point.
Yeah. Sue, would it be helpful to have a motion, or was this discussion and sort of the outcome sufficient to give you guidance on testimony and such?
I think it would be helpful to have a motion.
Okay.
Just so and you wouldn't necessarily have to say what a multiplier would be, but you could certainly just say a multiplier if you want to. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about what that would be. So for you to say exactly what it would be might not be the best idea.
Right. Hang on one second. I'm just trying to see if I can. Yep, go ahead.
I'd move that we oppose the legislation as it is, unless it takes into consideration some multiplier and delay in date for changes in the proposed budgets that have not passed yet. Does that cover it, Sue?
Okay, so I have, we oppose legislation as it is unless it takes into consideration some multiplier and changes. What did you say to that?
Proposed budgets.
To proposed budgets? Okay.
There's got to be some allowance for what people are trying to pass,
Sorry, did you get the part that Clarence said about delaying the deadline?
I had make the date as late as possible. Yeah.
Kevin, go ahead.
I would just ask Clarence that we frame this motion in a positive as opposed to an opposing one. If we can do that.
Maybe instead of saying I oppose, they say
Clarence, what I'm wondering if maybe you could say is that sort of like the VSBA approves allowing sufficient time for voting and flexibility in potential budget increases, something like that.
Yeah, I'm in favor of changing it to a positive that we're in favor of the agency doing something, but to help us out because of the virus situation. But these are the things that need to be taken into consideration when doing it. The moving of the date, the increases that districts are forced into for various reasons. They've got to be a little more defined than just last year's budget doesn't work.
Okay, the VSBA is in favor of the legislature consideration. considering multipliers and
Something in the way of providing more time for districts without approved budgets to be able to seek approval from their communities.
Yeah.
Neil?
Does that cover the things you need, Kim?
I think it's important that not for the language of the motion, but that we're not okay with a multiplier that isn't at minimum inflationary.
okay, so the VSBA is in favor of the legislature considering a multiplier and providing more time for the local budgets to seek approval from their communities. Is that summarize what you were all saying?
I think Mark's last point is that there is sort of some minimum budgetary multiplier that we're in favor of, so we wouldn't. Well,
I don't know if we want that as part of the motion and tie Sue's hands.
right. I think I mean it's probably more accurate to say that we're just not in favor of level funding the budgets, right? That what we are in favor of is allowing districts the discretion to increase spending based on their needs. Yeah,
Okay.
trying to find the right language for a motion, though, is sometimes tricky.
All right, so I now have, I don't know if this makes a lot of a change, but it says the VSBA is in favor of the legislature to consider a multiplier and provide more time for local budgets to seek approval from their communities. Is that, Clarence, is that what you're trying to say with your motion?
Yes.
Okay, is there, I don't think I have a second to it, but.
I'll second it. Oh,
who's
sorry,
that?
go ahead, Kim.
No, that's okay. I was going to ask a question of Sue to see if those two ideas, before you second, Mark, if it's okay, just so we don't have to like amend or go backwards. Does that, are we speaking contrary to ourselves that we want to be able to vote later and we want to be able to have a budget that is at least budget from the year before plus multiplier? Because we don't really necessarily, it's sort of and if budgets can't be passed, we would seek to have budgets no less than previous years with adequate multiplier or something. I don't really know what that language is. I just want to make sure by saying that multiplier is fine, they're not going to impose budgets on us July 1st. I don't feel like it's an either or. We definitely want both.
So what you're saying, Kim, is that you wouldn't want to have a budget imposed with a multiplier until you got past the later date, which should be later than June 30th, for passing a budget. Right?
Yep.
Sorry, muted. Yes.
Okay.
That is, so I would second that version of the motion, Clarence, if that's okay with you and if Carrie got all that.
Yeah, I think that makes good sense, Kim, to have that the imposed part of whatever just wouldn't happen till after the later date and you've had a chance to take care of it yourself.
Yep.
I don't know how you add that to the motion, but I think that's a general discussion that Sue ought to have that understands what our rationale is for this. That might help without it being stated explicitly, but I think that's the intent.
Mark, also, if I could unsecond, I just don't want there, like if this is a position of the VSBA, since there's a local interest for me, I would rather have somebody else second it.
I'll second it.
Okay, so before we first and second, and let me just read. I want to make sure I have the right version here.
Yep.
The VSBA is in favor of the legislature to give more time for local budgets to seek approval from their communities. If the vote goes beyond June, then they consider a multiplier.
I think we want to remove reference to June, and I think we just want to, it's sort of what, it's the scenario where we'd want to give boards as much time as possible to do this on their own. And when that the final act here is that if a budget is to be set by the AOE, that it do take into consideration some multiplier.
If the budget
I think that does it.
goes beyond, is to be set.
Kim, did you want to add something?
Just wanted to make sure my husband didn't start chatting in the background. I had to mute and hold up my hand. We have a lot of people trying to do stuff at this house right now. No, I think that gets it, that if a budget should not be able to be passed by a later date, and at that point, any imposed budget should include a multiplier over previous year's educational spending or whatever.
So the VSBA is in favor of the legislature giving time for local budgets to seek from their communities. If the budget is to be set by the AOE, then they consider a multiplier. Is that?
I will defer to Sue. Do you, Sue, is that particularly yet vague enough for you?
Excuse me. I think it's okay. I just wanted to make sure that you feel included in that is the flexibility to address the issue of a measurable increase in equalized pupils.
That's right. Yeah. And I wanted to be careful because I mean, I think the motion is good, but I don't want it to detract from the conversation that we had before, because you're right. So I think it did include some of that and your flexibility to be able to at least bring that up for discussion,
Okay.
you know, when providing testimony.
Okay.
So is that good for the motion, or do you want to make adjustments?
I think that's good for the motion. I mean, I think as long as Sue's okay with it, and I think that the folks that are on the meeting right now, I think have a full understanding based on our conversation that's included.
So the motion is made by Clarence and seconded by Mark or Kim?
Seconded by Mark.
Okay. You want me
Is
to
there
final time?
so is there any further discussion on it?
I think I would just add that while we want to help inform Sue, it sounds like there's ongoing communication happening with Sue and Jeff and the 18 affected districts. And I am hearing that we are giving Sue adequate flexibility to kind of let that, for me, that takes the lead, because they are in it day to day, and Sue and Jeff are in the legislature day to day. So I guess giving you guidance, but in my opinion, deferring to the value of the conversation you had earlier almost. I think we can impart the board perspective that we are elected by our communities, and we want every opportunity to have our communities weigh in on their school budget. So I think from a pure school board standpoint, that's the message I can bring to you that would resound. But I think otherwise your expertise that you're deriving from superintendents is going to help, I think, guide through this as well. So thank you for that collaboration.
All right, if there's no other discussion, then I will look all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. It's our first official vote on a remote platform like this. Or I
It
should
was
say,
way better than votes, by the way.
at least with all of us remote.
Yes.
All right, Sue, you wanted to talk about Act 173.
Yes. So yesterday, Secretary French was in the Senate Education Committee. He was there prior to this budget default discussion, talking to them about Act 173 and recommending a 1-year delay for Act 173 because of the COVID-19 crisis, not wanting to add another responsibility onto school boards in addition to, and I should say school communities, in addition to what they're currently dealing with, which is a lot. So he proposed that yesterday, and NEA came in and said that they were actually in favor of an indefinite delay, which the committee did not seem to be in favor of. The committee seemed to be much more in favor of a 1-year delay and then see what is happening next year. So last year there was a 1-year delay in implementation of Act 173, which, as you'll remember, is a law that went into effect in 2018, or was enacted in 2018, but had a graduated approach to it going into effect. And it's to enhance the effectiveness, availability, and equity of services provided to all students who require additional support. And it changes the funding model for special education from a reimbursement model to a census-based model. So I did not express an opinion of the VSBA on extension because I wanted to talk with all of you first. So now is your time to give me input on a 1-year extension of Act 173.
Kevin.
So would this also include deliberations on the weighting study?
No, the weighting study is separate. And the weighting study has been, Sandra's going to go over with all of you a little bit later in the meeting what the approach of the General Assembly has been to bills that they were considering before this whole COVID-19 pandemic hit. So that the weighting study is still under consideration, but if you'll remember, the last time we met was pretty much right before everything started going crazy. And so you came up with your position on the weighting study, and I haven't had a chance to use that position yet because it just hasn't even been under discussion because they've been dealing with COVID-19. But this does not have to do with the weighting study. I mean, the weighting study was required by Act 173, but this 1-year delay that's being proposed for Act 173 is not delaying the weighting study, to my understanding.
I guess I can fully understand this at the same time, as we delay. I mean, within our district, and I don't know exactly what the answer the superintendent and special ed people, et cetera, would have, or what sort of comments they'd have. But we've been working on changing practices with the assumption that our funding formula moving, changing as well is expected. And it just sort of, it's become very, we're trying to change practices, and that would be consistent with the new funding formula, but the funding formula isn't coming. So it's, it's getting very, very sort of, things are out of sync, is my concern. But at the same time, I think a lot of districts are, are not ready yet for the change. But I think it can start if the delay just goes on year after year after year, or indefinitely as the NEA requests, then that in and of itself, I think, will create problems at some point.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim. And just a reminder for folks, if you don't mind muting when you're not talking, that'll help with the sound a little bit. Any other board input? Kevin, do you have something else?
Well, I think particularly for my unified district, they've been walking down the path of incorporating the actions of 173 for a while. And from a financial point of view, 173 is not that lucrative for us. So I guess I would think that there's a certain contingent out there, and there's certain things you can do or should be working towards anyway, that are independent of the financial aspect.
Is that support for a 1-year delay or not support for a 1-year delay?
I hate to talk off the cuff for a lot of people, but like I said, my particular unified district, which is one of 3 in my county, is a little nervous about ending up as also with the weighting study on the negative end of the equation as opposed to the positive.
Okay. Anybody else have any input on this one?
I think I
Neil?
would say, oops,
It's
sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Michelle Braun from Washington Orange. I can't speak for my whole region since this just is coming up tonight. But I know for the Montpelier Roxbury district, we would support a delay.
Great, thank you. Kim?
I think I feel as though we would almost have to. It's pretty extraordinary what's happening. I think not an indefinite delay because there is an intention to move towards a different delivery model, but there's not been the ability, I don't know, the capacity from the AOE or the support that I think most districts would find necessary to make that shift in practice to have this be implemented while we can't even be working together towards that end of a shift in practice. So I think it would seem as though most boards would welcome and school districts welcome the year delay. The rules process is underway and we're supposed to be holding hearings with the State Board of Ed, and those were to have begun at our next meeting next week, and I have not heard how that would be impacted by a delay. So I am going to ask the State Board Chair to make certain whatever happens is adjusted for in the language as well, because that I don't think that they delayed the timeline on rules when they delayed the timeline on private providers, and that was problematic. So hopefully they'll get all that cleaned up when they do a delay. There seemed to be positive sentiment for at least the 1-year delay to be revisited the following year, and no interest by the Senate to make rules that went beyond dealing with the crisis or alter rules that went beyond dealing with the crisis in the 1-year mode. So they were not open, it didn't sound like, to like the NEA's request for indefinite or 2-year.
Okay. Kevin?
The other thing to consider, and it may be advantageous. The way that the block grant is set up right now, it is just purely based on head count, not equalized pupils or any sort of consideration of the struggles certain districts have over others with special needs in their districts. And that was briefly discussed last week with Professor Colby in the weighting study, and the weighting study recognizes that and sort of alludes to the fact that it needs to be corrected, but at this point nobody wants to correct it until the known flawed system hits the ground and gets running, and then correct it from that point of view. So if the weighting study goes forward and all of a sudden just identifies what some of these shortcomings are, it may make the block grant thing modifications for the block grant more conducive in the future.
So Sue, I'm hearing support for a 1-year delay at this point.
I
I
would
have
agree.
a question, Neil.
Yep, go ahead, Clarence.
Clarence, I have a question for Sue. Did the committee that was working on this bill come up with a report? Did they ever come to any kind of consensus on some of the problems that were going on with it?
I'm not sure I understand your question,
Remember,
Clarence.
Nicole
Bill,
was working with a group of people to
Oh.
get some of the things straightened out, and they never really met very much and were never able to come to agreement on what it was, what they were, what they wanted to do. Maybe it was what they were recommending for rules for the state board. I'm not sure exactly what it was. I knew there was some.
Yes, that's the Act 173 advisory group, I believe is what you're referring.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, the Act 173 advisory group has been meeting. They didn't meet in March, or I think it was, let's see, we didn't meet in April. I believe there was a meeting in March. It may have been February though. I can't remember.
Yeah, it was
Was it
February because
February?
March was
Yeah.
like town meeting day week, like it was that
That's
Monday
right.
before meeting day, so they didn't meet then either.
Yeah. So the rules that Kim is talking about, that's the process that the advisory group, that's the rules that the advisory group was working on language. And it was, the issue that you're talking about, Clarence, was that it was difficult to get the agency to give feedback on what the advisory group was proposing, and it just was kind of a prolonged process. I think that's what you're referring to.
Yeah.
But we've gotten through that, I think. At least part of it.
Because nothing is ready to go and it isn't figured out, they could very well, they could delay it another year. I understand that with all the virus stuff that's going around, that's causing inability to get a lot of things done as we'd like to. But I totally agree with Kevin. We need to get that weighting study finished up and applied so we all know where we stand with everything, because this is where you're going to go to a block grant on student numbers. If it's equalized students, that's one thing that could very well make a big difference in the way things are calculated. I myself wasn't particularly thrilled with this legislation where they lumped 504 in with special ed, and just now they both have to come out of the block grant. They aren't two separate funds. It was I had a problem with that methodology of doing things. So the longer they delay it, in my book, is good until they get some of the kinks worked out. So.
Okay. Colleen, did you have a point?
Yes. So I'm just wondering what the advisory group would recommend the VSBA position to be. And it just seems to me that advisory group has some really talented professionals who know a whole lot more about this topic than we do. And it might make sense to follow their lead. But I may not know something else behind that. But what is the position of the advisory group on implementation?
I don't think the last time the advisory group met, COVID-19 wasn't really underway yet in this country, at least not to any large extent. And so I don't think this is a question that the advisory group has grappled with in a meeting. And I don't think the group is going to be meeting until, I think, May is when we'll be meeting.
So Sue, I think at this point, I think maybe just a motion from someone that VSBA supports a 1-year delay in the implementation of Act 173.
So moved. Clarence.
Amy McMillan seconds.
Did you capture all of that, Carrie?
Sorry, it took me a minute to find my mute button. VSBA supports a 1-year delay on to Act 173. Clarence motioned and Amy McMullen seconded.
Okay. Any further discussion on it?
I'll just say, Colleen, I was the state board liaison with the advisory group, so I attended a lot of those meetings, and I know Sue also did. And I don't know that there were any outstanding issues that, with respect to the funding rules, that would be impacted by a delay. I don't know that they were able to come to consensus with the AOE on the majority of that before we got it and had to move forward at the state board. So I think because there remained continued concern and interest in support to the field and changing methodology and best practice, I'm guessing as practitioners, they would welcome the time to do that well, particularly since that's not been able to be a focus of the work when nobody's in school. So I certainly wouldn't want to speak for them, but I think Senate Ed was looking to have input. My guess would be, as our state board chair, we'll have a conversation directly with Megan Roy, who leads that group, and before our meeting next week. And I had reached out about if they were meeting this past Monday, and because of everything else that the AOE is handling and dealing with, it was not a priority for the group to be meeting.
Any other discussion? All right. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Sounds unanimous. Sue, were there any other items under COVID-19 related legislation that we wanted to talk about?
Only if you'd like me to go over the temporary changes to the elections provisions and that were signed by the governor last week. I could do that for you if you would like.
I think briefly, as I'm looking at the time, I think it's good for board members to be aware of it, but I think we want to make sure that we leave some time for some of the other items. So maybe like a quick overview.
So then I think we could, are you saying we should go on to number 3 on the agenda, Neil?
Actually, what I was saying was if you could just give a quick overview of the changes.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, so there were temporary elections changes that were signed into law by the governor last week. They removed the signature gathering requirements for candidates who want to be placed on the ballot. So that would apply to people who are running for school board if you're still having elections occurring later this spring. They allowed the legislative body of a municipality to adopt Australian balloting for an upcoming vote if Australian balloting is not currently used, and also grant the Secretary of State authority with the governor's agreement to order procedures in light of the COVID-19 virus. And those procedures could include, but they're not limited to requiring mail balloting.
So can we just have, if you aren't muted, can you mute? Because we're getting a little bit of echo on the phone now.
So requiring mail balloting, creating early or mail ballot collection stations, permitting municipal clerks to process and begin counting ballots in a 30-day window preceding the day of an election. So that takes into account some of the counting issues that we were talking about earlier, permitting drive-up car window collection of ballots by election officials, extending the time for municipal clerks to process and count ballots, and extending voting hours on the day of an election. And the list is not exhaustive. There might be additional or different procedures that are deemed necessary. I spoke with the Secretary of State's office yesterday about these procedures, and they are working on them. So I'm expecting that we're going to see some procedures from the Secretary of State's office, hopefully next week. Would be great. I know some of these districts that haven't held their votes yet are very anxious to vote in June. There were also some temporary changes to the open meeting law. You should have received an email about that. The changes are that the designated physical meeting location is removed, and remote meetings such as this are allowed. You have to include on the agenda information so that the public can participate in those meetings, and that they need to be recorded, which is a new requirement during the COVID-19 emergency. All the school board meetings have to be recorded. So that basically is a quick overview of the changes that were signed into law last week.
Kim, did you have something?
You know, I just muted George, Gonda, and Michelle because you had background that was interfering. So I'm going to unmute you now. If you can mute yourself, that'd be awesome.
My question, Sue, was just, are these time-bound changes? So if we have until the end of August to pass budgets, do these conditions remain?
They're in effect for the year 2020, the rest of the year.
Okay, thank you.
The elections provisions, the open meeting law provisions, those are in effect for the state of emergency. So as long as the state of emergency is in effect.
Any other questions for Sue on these changes? All right, I think we can move along to item number, we're on number 3 now, Sue, I guess?
Yes. So I just, we have a number of things to let you know about under this topic. And also I'm sure that you all may have questions related to COVID-19. So this could cover a wide range of information and questions. But before we get started on the questions, I just wanted to give you an update on the office and how we are all functioning during the state of emergency. We've all been working from home, but I really wanted to commend the whole VSBA team for how well everyone is working together through this. We have a meeting by, we've been trying different platforms. So we've tried Zoom, GoToMeeting, and Google Hangouts. And we meet every morning at 8 or 8:30 to go over what we're going to be working on that day and any projects. And it's actually, I think, made us be extremely productive. And we've been in close communication with each other as needed throughout the day. Susan has just finished up a superintendent search under newly challenging conditions. So it's, I just wanted to let all of you know that things are going quite smoothly for us, even though it's been a change. So I wanted to let you know about that. I also wanted to let you know, and Sandra's going to tell you about this, about a survey that was sent out to school board members. So you should have received it. And Sandra, do you want to give them some information about the survey?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. I had to call in because my screen was freezing. So I can't see you, but I'm thinking of all of you, and feel free to ask any questions when I end. It's hard that I can't see you. I won't know from facial expression if you're understanding what I'm saying. So I'll pause at the end and ask if there are questions. The VSBA member inquiry survey was developed as a way to collect feedback from all school board members with regard to concerns and needs during this time of crisis. We've been watching and we've now analyzed feedback, and we've identified the following 4 priorities within the 6 main areas of school board work. The first one is progress monitoring, and we see a connection to progress monitoring with regard to the AOE's requirement of continuity of education plans. The second priority was developing a budget and assuring financial oversight specifically around the CARES Act funding and guidance. And we do not have a lot of information from the federal government yet on the CARES Act funding. So while we have prioritized that, we need to wait for a little bit more information before we can take any action on training or webinars on that. The third priority was effective and ethical operations in an era of distance learning and remote management. And the fourth priority was engaging the community, specifically around strategies for electronic engagement. So thinking about timing and wanting to provide support and information to all of you in the most timely manner, we are hoping to address the first 2 priorities within a very short amount of time. So the progress monitoring and the connectivity to the continuity of education plans, we're actually hoping to do a webinar next week, and we're collaborating with the Vermont Superintendents Association to pull that together. The CARES Act funding and guidance training would be right after that, but again, we just need to wait for a little more information from the federal government, and that is expected to come within the next week or so. So those were our 2 top priorities. And then once we can move past those 2, we'll move on to the last 2 priorities. The VSBA member inquiry survey will remain open for the unforeseeable future. So as needs and concerns shift, which we've already seen them shift just in the last 3 weeks, you can certainly return to that form and submit additional feedback, and I monitor it on a regular basis and look for new trends or new needs regularly. And we're going to have a direct link to the survey on our vermontvsba.org/corona webpage. So you'll be able to return to that easily at any time. So I'll pause there and ask if there are any questions or any feedback.
Any questions from folks? Not seeing any, Sandra.
Okay.
Oh, Judy, did you have something?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to thank you very much for putting that out there. I really appreciated it and thought it was it made a great overture to the communities, and I actually stole it for something in work, so I thought it was great.
Thank you. Okay, was there any?
Oh, go ahead, Sam.
I was just going to ask you, Sue, was there anything else on number 3?
I don't think so. You were going to give us some information under number 4, I think, right?
Correct. So are we all set to move on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So number 4 is update on other legislative.
I think we have some more things under number 3 before we get to number 4. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
So we'll finish up number 3 and then we'll go to 4 on the agenda. So a couple other things that I wanted to mention under 3 are that there is a legal team of 5 attorneys sponsored by VSBA and VSBA, and they are answering all kinds of questions, legal questions that have come up related to COVID-19. A lot of their questions are personnel related, and those are submitted by superintendents, but there are also some governance type questions that have come up that have been submitted by school boards, and you are receiving answers to those governance questions. Whenever we receive a question, it goes out to the legal team, and we usually get an answer the next day or the day after that, and then we email it out to everyone. At the bottom of that email, there's a link to the full document, so you can go back and see answers to previous questions. And that whole system has been working very well, and we're really thankful for that. I also wanted to let you know that that Neil and I, along with the executive director and president of several other organizations, including the Vermont Superintendents Association, Vermont Principals Association, the Vermont Special Education Association, the VCSEA, the Vermont NEA, and VSBA, and the Independent Schools Association. We are all meeting weekly with Secretary French to get information from the agency on key issues, updates from the agency, answer any questions that AOE has for us, and problem solve on specific issues. Last week, we discussed the continuity of learning plans, broadband access, legislative issues, and the issue of school districts that did not have a budget yet. And we'll be meeting again this Friday. It's a standing meeting that's going to be happening at least through the beginning of June. So if there are particular issues that you think should be discussed in that type of a meeting, you can certainly provide input to either to me or to Neil, and we will work on that. The last thing that I wanted to make you aware of under this agenda item is that tomorrow there is going to be a webinar at 10:45 as the information has been coming out and getting more and more worrisome regarding the education fund. We thought it would be prudent to hold a webinar for superintendents, school board chairs, and business managers with a presentation by the Joint Fiscal Office so that those people are getting the same information that legislators are getting on the impact of the pandemic on the education fund. And all of you as VSBA board members are also invited to participate in the webinar. I'm sorry for the short notice, but I think the webinar was just, believe it was just pulled together this morning. That's how webinars are happening these days. They're getting pulled together very quickly because it's such a fluid situation and changes are happening so quickly, and we're wanting to keep people informed. So that seems to be the way things are happening nationwide right now. I'm seeing a lot of webinars that are coming up very quickly. But if you're available to participate in that webinar, I would definitely recommend it. It's at 10:45 tomorrow morning, and you should have received an email from us with a link to register. If you haven't received it yet, I'll make sure that it goes out tonight. And I would recommend registering for it even if you aren't available at 10:45, because you will get a link and be able to listen to it later on.
The email went out before the meeting.
Okay, great. Thanks, Carrie. So you should have the email already that has the link for you to register for it. And don't worry that if you're not a school board chair, you're still able to access it. I guess now, Neil, would be a good time to open it up for any information or questions that board members have related to COVID-19.
Sure. And I do want to encourage folks, especially if you haven't chance to talk with your the districts in your region, I would highly encourage those board chairs to see if they can be on that call tomorrow. I think the information that we're hearing, and it was even reported in Digger earlier this week, you know, the whole or the shortfall in the ed fund is looking to be somewhere around $90 million right now. And while it's important for superintendents to be aware of this, I think it's important for boards to work closely with their superintendents, because you're probably going to need to think about you know, possible implications as this thing develops. So Colleen, go ahead.
So for the webinar, is there a limit on the number of people who can participate? And I'm just thinking, I know that I have a few members on our board who would want to participate. So is it limited to 1 or 2 per board, or can you have 12?
As long as you can sign up on the link. I know that our software has been upgraded to allow more people to participate. So I don't think there would be an issue with a few more people signing up for it.
Yeah, I
Okay,
think there's
thank you.
currently like 150 and we can take up to 500, so.
Okay, thank you.
Michelle, did you have something?
Thanks, Neil. It's Michelle Braun, Washington Orange. I have a bunch of questions, and so I'm going to try to go through them quickly so I don't take all the time in the world. I know my district was really upset to read about the school closure in the news without being informed in advance. And they are hoping that as things roll out, for instance, we've heard some indication that Secretary French will make a decision about when to end the school year. And we really hope that that is communicated to superintendents before being communicated to the media so that districts have a chance to work on messaging with their communities. If we do choose to end the school year early and we don't complete 175 days of school, are we going to have a plan for what happens with the lost days? Will they just be erased, or will we create summer school or start early? We need to think through a plan for that. We heard a rumor, which may be guidance or it may not be guidance, we're not clear, that we not only have to continue paying our private pre-K providers, but we also have to provide education to pre-K students who are with private providers, who are not our district students. And we don't understand how that would work, how our preschool teachers would take on an additional 60 kids and provide education services to them. And we don't know whether that's real. We don't know whether that's actually guidance or just rumor. I would love to see this state take some leadership on food service. Right now, we are about at capacity and seeing more kids every week coming for meals. Our only plan B at this point is to approach downtown restaurants and ask them if we can use their kitchens. It seems like maybe there are other districts, maybe other districts are all contracting out to big providers. I don't know. Maybe we're the only ones in that position, but we are going to need help. It would be great to see just generally, I guess, kind of analogous to the federal situation, seeing the state take leadership to make things more evenly distributed across the state. That's all.
Thanks, Michelle. Sue, I didn't know if you wanted to respond to any of those individually or if we just want to take it offline.
Well, I think some of them are topics that we could bring up in our meetings with Secretary French, Neil. Almost all of them really, but the pre-K one, I'm going to ask Sandra if she has any more information about the pre-K question.
So here's what I know. I know that as of Friday, there started to be conversation and concern about the suggestion that public schools may take over the education of pre-K kiddos that have been enrolled in private programs. Over the weekend, one of our representatives reached out to ask if anybody had seen anything formal. Was there any kind of formal guidance on this? Because superintendents were not quite sure how this would work. I believe this week, Tracy Sawyers, who's the executive director of the Vermont Council for Special Ed Administrators, reached out to Deputy Secretary Heather Boucher, as well as Kate Rogers, who's the AOE Early Education Manager, expressing concern that we had started to hear this might be a direction that we're going in, and asking that a few of us be involved in a conversation to help formulate any guidance to the field before it goes out. That was Monday, and I have not heard anything since.
Thanks, Sandra.
Sure. I'm trying to stay up on that one though.
Yep.
Yeah, so to Sue's point, we can take those other items and bring them forward on our weekly call with Dan French.
Thank you.
Sure. And I don't think necessarily, Michelle, I don't think that you were necessarily alone in finding out through the media about the school closure thing. I think that was how a lot of us learned about it. So
yeah, that was how I learned about it too. And I think even superintendents, how they learned about it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Any other board member questions related to some of the COVID-19 stuff? Seeing none then, Sue, I guess we can move on to item number 4, which is an update on other legislative issues.
Okay, that's the one where I was going to ask Sandra to just give you a overview of that.
Yes. So as of this morning, the Vermont Senate has now the ability to vote remotely on a temporary basis while the governor's declaration of emergency and stay-at-home order is in effect. This temporary law will expire at the beginning of the legislative session in 2021. However, the General Assembly is already discussing the need to have something more permanent in statute should there be another wave of this virus or any other emergency that would prevent people from gathering in the future. The House of Representatives plans to vote on the topic very soon as well. The Senate Joint Rules Committee is considering and responding to requests from committee chairs to bring topics to the floor for a vote. So there's sort of a triage process happening right now. And the Senate has been caucusing nearly every morning to share what they're hearing from constituents and what they are or would like to be able to discuss in their respective committees. All committee meetings are shown live and are recorded and can be viewed on YouTube through a link on each committee's agenda. The Senate caucus and other non-committee events are listed with a link under announcements on the Vermont Legislative website. So you can watch and listen to anything going on right now live. Both chambers are being asked to address only those issues related to COVID-19. However, as time has passed, more and more issues are arising so that every committee has issues related to COVID-19 needing action now. For now, issues that are not directly addressing COVID-19 are being categorized loosely as Tier 2, meaning that while they may be important and they may have already had legislative action this session, the topics are on hold until the need to respond to the COVID-19 crisis lessens. Now that the Senate has the ability to vote remotely, they are likely to take up bills addressing time-sensitive COVID-related issues, such as extending licenses for some professional groups, for example, emergency services providers, evictions, the use of notary publics, and agricultural issues. An example was the decrease of demand of milk during this crisis. Several committees in both chambers have been hearing from several witnesses with regard to the effect of the COVID-19 virus on FY20 as well as FY21 school budgets and ultimately on the Ed Fund. Though more guidance and information is needed from the federal government before specific plans can be formulated. And so that's what led us to share with you the training that's being offered tomorrow morning by the Joint Fiscal Office. So that's what's happening right now. It has been very, very focused on COVID-related topics.
So
Any questions?
I think that's it for our update on other legislative issues, unless anyone has questions.
Any other questions for folks on that? I know, Sue, you and I talked briefly earlier today. What's your current understanding of how the rest of this session is likely to play out?
My current understanding, which of course could change tomorrow, is that they will be working through April and possibly into May, but that they are going to, right now, they think they're going to need to come back at the end of the summer because of issues caused by the pandemic.
So stay tuned, everyone. Looks like this could be a protracted legislative session. Any other questions on any other of the legislative issues? We're going to take a brief look at the strategic plan monitoring report, which was included in the packet.
Yes.
Anything that you wanted to highlight on that, Sue, from a staff perspective?
I guess I would just say overall that it's been a very demanding and challenging time for everybody on the staff. Someone recently described it as you're in a batting cage and the balls just keep coming faster and faster. That's pretty much what our last 3 weeks have been like. But I feel that everyone has approached it definitely with a can-do spirit, and we've gotten so much done. It's been pretty incredible, and I think we have some good resources for board members to help them deal with the situation. And we're always open to hearing from you or any other board members if you have ideas of things that you think that we should be doing. But some of the things that we have been working on are laid out in the outcomes section of the strategic plan monitoring tool.
Any board members have any questions for any of the staff on the monitoring report? So just a reminder, I think it's a really good thing if you get the chance just to read through the monitoring report, because I think it's a great reflection of the work that we're doing and how it directly ties back to the goals that we set for the organization each year. So some light reading, highly recommended. With that then, I think we can move on to item number 6, which is VSBA board committees. We have 3 of them. Resolutions, member engagement, and financial. Recall that we did talk a little bit about these at the last meeting. In fact, even got a couple of brave souls to offer their services on one or more of the committees. I want to maybe go backwards a little bit and talk finance committee first, because I think that one we might be able to have fully staffed and just get board approval for that to move forward tonight. Sue, if you wouldn't mind, just a brief overview. So we've got Kim and Jim.
According to the bylaws, the Finance Committee consists of the treasurer and 2 members of the board appointed by the president with the advice of the board. The job of the Finance Committee is to present a proposed budget to the board and recommend any adjustments to the board's financial monitoring policies as needed. Kim is the treasurer, and I think she has reached out to a couple of board members who sounds like I have an echo, who have served on this committee in the past and might have an interest in serving on it again. Kim, did you want to speak?
Yeah, we this year will be presenting a 9-month budget because we are aligning with the traditional fiscal year of July 1, June 30. So I had reached out to Jim and Lori, who had helped out on the committee the last couple of years, I believe, thinking that it will be helpful to have some experience to think through how we go about this and make this as smooth and seamless as possible. That being said, if there's others dying to do it, I'm sure either of them would say thanks. But so we open that up, but I do want to let folks know that they have said they'd be willing to help out, and my reason for reaching out directly was simply because this is going to be a little bit more than the typical, because we're trying to make this transition, and we will engage with our audit/accountant person through this process to make sure we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's and understand how to make this transition appropriately.
Is there anybody else that was dying to serve on this committee?
So Neil, this is Heather Gagne. I was actually going to volunteer for this committee. My background is in grants and financial management.
Okay.
Awesome.
I think they would be happy to have you.
That'd be great. Is it okay for us to have 3? Or do either Jim or Lori want to say thank you? Or Sue or Neil, is it fine for us to have more than 2?
I would think that it was fine to have more than 2. I think
Yeah,
that
we've
was,
had more before.
that's
I think
that's
3 is the minimum.
more of a minimum requirement, right?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay.
Awesome.
So
Thank
then
you so much.
Yep. So then you guys can consider yourselves duly appointed, a committee of 4. So Kim, Jim, Lori, and Heather. So then the other 2 committees that we have are the Resolutions Committee and the Member Engagement Committee. And Sue, can you just remind me again who were the wonderful souls that volunteered for those positions last meeting?
So in the last meeting, the people who volunteered for the Resolutions Committee were Don Collins, Clarence Haynes, Mark Clough, and Colleen McKinnon.
Okay.
That committee requires one representative from each region.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
I
then,
had it as well.
okay.
Yeah, Jim Salzgiver offered to be a part of the resolutions.
Nancy Russell Windsor will be part.
Okay.
Do
Are
you still
you,
need, sorry, this is Adrienne. Do you still need somebody from Rutland or no?
Clarence is on there, I believe.
Okay, I didn't catch all the names. Thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, I said I'd do it if because George was on one, and depending on whether Adrienne can do it if she'd like to, but if she's available or if she's tied up with the insurance business is the way I left it.
I'm not. If you'd like to get off, I'll be happy to get on.
Before anybody makes a commitment of actually getting off, I want to make sure that everybody understands what getting off means. Getting off means that you are now eligible to serve on the Member Engagement Committee. So we don't actually get off of anything here completely. We just rearrange things a little bit. So, you know, for the resolutions, we do need to make sure that we've got 1 member from each region. But if you find yourselves in a unique position where your region colleague has agreed to serve on Resolutions Committee, then you can consider yourself duly appointed to the Member Engagement Committee.
Yes, so Clarence, since you've already signed up first, it's your choice.
George is the other one from Rutland County. I really am like a third wheel from the county. So you go ahead and do it, Adrienne, and I'll just bow out. That's fine with me.
Okay.
All right. Is there anybody that's currently with us this evening that is yet to engage in a committee? Kevin.
So I've been standing in the wings. Lori has done the resolution committee, and I'm thinking that she should obviously continue that if she so desires. So I guess I pick up the pieces then.
All right. So we'll slot you for member engagement then.
And you can put David Chandler into member engagement as well.
Awesome.
Great.
And Amy McMullen.
Perfect.
And Judy from Washington Orange.
Nice. Were you able to get all that, Sue or Carrie?
I think Carrie's getting it, right, Carrie?
Yes, I have it.
And this is Susan. I'm backing her up just in case.
All right. I didn't want
I have all the names for resolution. I have Don Collins, Clarence, Mark, Jim, Nancy, Adrienne, and Lori. Am I missing a name?
Clarence bowed out from that, and I think.
Oh, that's right.
And Mark Schauber from Wyndham.
And Mark. Oh, I think I have. Oh. So both Marks.
Yes.
Okay. And then for member engagement right now, I have Kevin Hansen, David Chandler, Amy McMullen, and Judy Murray. Is that correct? Missing
Plus
anyone?
the ones who volunteered last meeting, which was George Gonda, Tara Sweet, Dan
Yes.
Sharp, Kevin Amyot.
All right. Is that everyone?
I think so.
Michelle Braun, Washington Orange. I'm not on a committee.
Ooh.
Do we have someone from Washington Orange on the resolutions committee yet, Carrie?
I don't think so.
That would be the only other, Judy's the other person, so Judy's on a member engagement, right?
Member engagement. So yes, Michelle. Okay, so Michelle is also. Okay.
Yep. So the good news, at least for the folks that are doing the resolutions, that is, it's not too terribly onerous. It typically is one meeting with some pre-reading associated with that. And then for the member engagement one, Sue, I'm guessing we probably ought to get together, figure out some agenda and get a first meeting scheduled for that then.
Yes.
Okay.
A remote meeting.
So stay
I would
tuned,
just say
member.
the finance committee as well is a summer commitment, and we imagined it to likely be a call-in meeting, and if we're able, a second meeting that would be in person if we're able to. And Sue and Carrie usually help us coordinate the timeline on that.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'll touch base with you about that, Kim, because there's some pre-work that needs to be done before those meetings, I think.
Yep.
Is there anything else that we needed to do with the committee, Sue, that I might be forgetting?
I don't think so. I think you've covered it.
All right. Being done with that item, then I guess we'll move on to the consent agenda, which is the March minutes. And folks have had a chance to read through them. Did anybody see any corrections or anything that needs to be changed in the minutes? Mark?
Yeah. Two things in regard to me. My name is MARC, not MARK, and I'm on the River Valleys Unified School District. There is no longer a Dover school district, or board, I should say.
Okay.
Okay, I'll make those adjustments.
Thank you.
Any other changes for the minutes, Tara?
Well, I had to leave early, so the last motion under number 12, the weighted study, I wasn't there for. Can that just be noted? Because I probably would have abstained, but I wasn't there to actually vote. So.
Okay. We can change
The
that.
vote on the weighted studies?
Yes.
On number D, I think we were still debating when I had to leave.
Any other changes to the minutes? Okay. All those in favor of the minutes then with those modifications, please say aye.
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 Do the minutes need a motion and a second?
I don't think, Clarence, you're the expert on this one.
What? Yeah, we should have a motion.
Okay, sorry. Need a motion.
The consent agenda. I will make that motion.
Clarence just
I will
made.
second.
Mark seconded.
George seconded.
I'll say
George.
doesn't matter.
George seconded it again.
Okay.
So now they're really official, and now I'm going to ask for all those in favor.
Aye.
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 Opposed? All right, we are the minutes have passed. Under new business, you're doing pretty well with time. I just want to let board members know. So this meeting, typically what you would have heard was Sue, Don, and I telling you about how fantastic the NSBA annual conference was. We would have just returned on Monday. As you all know, that did not happen. The conference was canceled. We had a conference call Tuesday. and learned that, so NSBA did indeed have insurance for the conference, so they don't think that there's going to be much of a financial impact to the cancellation of the conference. They think they're going to get most of their budgeted revenue that they were anticipating through the insurance that they had on that. The latest that we've heard was it looks like they are probably going to move the delegate assembly. So that was the portion of the meeting very similar to how we handle our delegate assembly, where we vote on new resolutions every year. It looks like that will be moved to August right now and be part of the NSBA's annual Summer Leadership Series, Summer Leadership Conference. I'm going to hold off a little bit just to make sure that that is indeed going to happen before I just run out and maybe grab plane tickets to that. But I think we probably will want to bring it back to the board just for confirmation that it's okay to send one or two folks to the delegate assembly, which it looks like it is going to get moved to August in Minneapolis, I believe.
Okay.
I don't think that I have anything else to report on there. I am just just maybe like a show of hands, how many folks have actually had a board meeting since we haven't been allowed to sort of all get together again?
Oh, yeah.
Cal Co-op has as well.
Yeah. Have things been generally going well for folks?
Yes.
Yes.
It makes, I found we had one and we had to have a couple executive sessions and they can be a little challenging. It doesn't go as smoothly as it does when you're in person. I guess
Yeah.
my only comment.
Do folks have any suggestions or recommendations for each other on how to handle the non-public piece of things? Some ways that work better than others? Susan.
Sorry, I lost my mute button. Yeah, I encountered this with superintendent interviews, and what we ended up doing was setting up 2 meetings. And one of them was the public meeting, and the other one was executive session meeting. Another alternative is pretty much what the legislature is doing, is they're having the meeting and streaming it live through YouTube for public, and then you can turn off the stream and nobody else is in your meeting.
Another option too is to have a conference call for the executive session portion of it to ensure security, because there's some worry that some of these platforms are not, they don't have the confidentiality that might be required by executive session.
Yeah. But maybe just quick going around, is everybody doing okay? I mean, I know it's not ideal circumstances, but I just want to make sure that folks, at least on our board, feel, if you ever need anything, please do not hesitate to reach out, whether it's to me or to Sue or anybody on the staff. And, even if it's just to say, man, this really stinks, and I could just use somebody to complain to for a little while, I'm happy to be that person if you need it. But, I really hope that folks are doing the best that they can given the situation. Yeah, Kevin.
Neil?
Sure, Don.
Sue, talking about what we were just doing with being concerned, about maybe other people coming in when you're doing this type of meeting. We did one last night, and we were talking about contract negotiation as an executive session. And some of the members started feeling uncomfortable, wondering if there might be some chance somebody could, be tapped into us. So what we have decided to do, we'll go to the phone type of meeting. But I just thought it's kind of interesting. I guess we all get paranoid during these times. But that issue did come up about, just how secure is it?
Yeah, I think a concern that a lot of us have after we've seen at least Senate get Zoom bombed at one point. So Kevin,
I
do you
would
have
like to
something?
let people know that under the VSBA website, we do have a web page with some resources, and one of them is tips for video conferencing board meetings. It's really more geared towards someone who's setting up the meeting, but it does have a short section on executive session, which says maintaining the confidentiality of executive session is essential. With the increase of video conferencing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, reports of hacking and malicious behavior have been reported. The FBI recently issued an alert regarding safeguards that can be taken to prevent hacking of virtual meeting platforms. Due to the highly sensitive and confidential nature of executive session topics, we recommend school boards consider holding all executive session discussions by telephone conference in order to ensure confidentiality. Holding executive sessions at the end of the meeting and coming back to public session only to adjourn is one strategy that can be used to ensure the public do not have to wait on the video platform while the school board is on a telephone conference for executive session purposes. So that's the recommendation from that document.
And
Thank you, Sue.
that document, as well as several others, are available on our COVID page, which is before the homepage on our website. At the top, you can go to the COVID page, and it's got, I think we have 4 documents about video conferencing on there.
Kevin's been trying to get in a question here real quick, so let me go to Kevin.
So I just want to take a minute through all this to just highlight what our unified district, and I'm sure a lot of others are, and taking on the monumental task of setting up free meals, free meal delivery, making sure that students are connected and have assignments and there's follow-up, and not only in turning in assignments, but teacher connection for questions, having packets available that are as self-explanatory as possible for homework. Like I said, I'm sure other districts are doing it, but it's just been a monumental, impressive task of how our unified district put all this together in a matter of a couple weeks.
Yeah, no, thanks, Kevin. I think a lot of us are very appreciative of how our staffs at all of our schools have handled the transition. Colleen, go ahead.
Yeah, along the same line, and thank you for saying that, Kevin. I'm wondering if it is appropriate for the VSBA to have some kind of statement of appreciation and support for our educators and personnel working in the schools, the food service, bus drivers, everybody. I don't know if the VSBA would do that, but it might be a nice gesture.
Mm-hmm. I can talk to Sue about that and see what what would be appropriate and what we think like the best way to do it would be.
I think I love that idea, Colleen, and share that appreciation. And I think if we're lifting our appreciation for our staff and educators, we want to include our administration. I think sleepless days and nights for lots of people trying to serve students and families right now.
Yeah, it's probably best not to list individuals or list specific roles, because then we're always liable to leave somebody out. But if there could be something
like administration, and finish with administration, start with educators, or
employees or whatever.
Employees, everybody who's
volunteers.
rallying. Agreed. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm just I love that idea too. I think that would really probably be appreciated as well as well deserved.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else want to share anything? Judy, please.
I agree completely, and I might even throw parents in there. I think our parents have been asked to do quite a bit that they didn't expect. So appreciation to all. For one of the questions regarding the meeting, the recorded meetings, these would then be official minutes, right? So that they need to be kept for a certain amount of time. Is that accurate?
Yes, they need to be kept by the district I don't think it's been clarified how long they need to be kept, but certainly they should be kept. I guess I don't want to say an amount of time right now, but that's something I'd like to ask the legal team about, how long they recommend people keep these. But they definitely need to be available in case a member of the public or a member of the press asks for the tape of the meeting.
And that's have been some of our challenges in past years when we thought about recording it, is where's the storage? Where do we keep it? Yeah, so that's something our board is going to have to consider, because I know it's come up multiple times in the past of why don't we record things, and there's logistical reasons, but
Neil?
looking into
Normally,
that.
you're not required to record them. With these online meeting platforms, I believe all of them have a feature that allows them to be recorded. Then it's just a matter of making sure they're stored properly.
Yeah,
Neil?
go ahead, Don. Yep,
Neil?
go ahead.
Oh, okay, Don. One of the things that we talked about last night at our board meeting that it started, I think, 2 weeks ago, and the board voted to continue it and sponsor it. We have what we call donut days, and 2 or 3 days a week, all the people who are around working in the buildings, one of the local bakeries, they get donuts, and the school board is going to pick up the tab, or the school board member, somebody's going to. And it's really been well received by the bus drivers, the people packing the lunches, everybody that's in there trying to do their best. At 2 or 3 days a week, they look forward to about 10 o'clock, fresh donuts coming in.
Good. Thanks for the idea.
Yeah.
Susan.
Just a quick shameless plug on the issue of open meeting law and executive session in these times. As it happens, the May 7th webinar was scheduled on the topic of open meeting law and executive session. So it will be as planned, but modified to accommodate some of these issues. And hopefully between now and then, we'll learn more from everybody as to what you're doing and what's working well, so we can share that out.
Perfect. Well, we've made it through our first remote VSBA board meeting. So thank you very much, everyone. I greatly appreciate it. Thanks for coming. Thanks for embracing some new technology. And like I said, if anybody ever has any questions or concerns or just wants to talk, feel free to reach out at any time. And I think we can plan to get together again probably next month this way as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Thank
All right.
you.
Stay
Thanks
safe.
very much. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Night.
Same old. Bye now.
Thank you all.
Night.
Stay safe. Good night. Exit.